Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Peg Oliveira. Thank you, Peg. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, for sure. Welcome, everyone. I am under the understanding that you are all early childhood educators, or you work in the classroom in some form. And we are approaching our topic today, establishing and managing routines, with that audience in mind. However, as I've learned, most of us who do this work are also parents. And so I encourage you to think broadly about the content that we're offering today, both as educators and as parents, if that's a role you play. The examples I'll give are classroom-based examples, but again, we can think about home-based examples as well. We are a cozy group today, so I welcome you to unmute yourself and jump in whenever you do have a question. However, right now, if you would all mute yourselves just so that we don't hear things like your dog and your doorbell and all of that sort of stuff in the background, that would be great. Additionally, I welcome and urge you to leave your cameras on so that I know that there's actual humans out there. But if you do need to turn your camera off, I understand. Just if you do have something to offer, maybe pop it back on, unmute yourself and say, hey, Peg, I have a question. You can try the raise the hand icon, but I often miss it. So I definitely just encourage you to jump right in. As Amy said, this is being recorded. So if you do turn your camera on, just understand that a small version of you in the corner may appear in this recording. All right, with that, I am going to share my screen tonight. Again, I don't want that to discourage us from being able to have a conversation. Don't let that be a reason you can't ask questions or offer your own comments. Feel free, jump in as needed. So let's get that operational piece under control here. I'm going to share that and then slideshow, play from the start. And I'm just going to ask you, maybe Amy can put up a finger. Tell me, do you see one slide or two slides?
One.
One. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Our topic tonight is establishing and managing routines. We're going to discuss not only how to get that done, but first I want to preface with why do we even care? The topic has always been, of interest and a favorite among educators for the 2 decades that I've been doing this work. But it becomes even more important and maybe even imperative in a time like we are experiencing now, when things are so uncertain, always changing. For me, I'll share, I live in New Haven, Connecticut. This is day 2 of the second day in 2 years that New Haven has not required masks indoors. So this is the very first time in 2 years that New Haven hasn't required me to wear a mask, even when I run inside and grab my coffee from my barista, right? That's a huge change for us. The children who reside in this community. Your community goes through similar shifts through this pandemic, as well as all the other crises that are occurring on our planet today. And so routines can actually be supportive of our mental well-being, our psychological health. And so for that reason, it's essential that we revisit what a routine is, why they're important, and then think about how to either establish, or for some of us, we may want to use the word reestablish, right? That's very common too, right? We start September off with a bang, all kinds of routines, and by the time we come back from winter break, we let that one go, and this one never really stuck. So this may also be a time to reestablish those routines for the remainder of the year to ensure that you all can have sort of a peaceful spring. and to start practicing maybe shifts in your routines so that when you do return for the summer session or September, whenever it is for you, you're more confident, more certain of your routines, and you have something that works even better. That's sort of in a nutshell our agenda for tonight. If, however, there's something that you are, burning to know, you are here because you came to answer X question, and I don't touch on it, write it down, put it in the chat, whatever it takes, but remember it so that we can at least bring it to the table at the end of this conversation. Try to address it if we can, and if not, I can at least offer some resources that maybe could be supportive. So I do want to make sure that whatever it is you came for tonight is at least acknowledged and ideally addressed, and if not, at least supported. So do take notes for yourself as we go through of questions you have. As I shared, this moment in history, unique, unlike any other, is a psychological hurdle for both grown-ups and children to get through. When things feel chaotic, changing, ever, new and different, the best thing we can do for ourselves and for the kids in our care is try to have some things that we can count on, right? Yes, kids like variety. Yes, kids like to be surprised, but not as much as we think. They really like to know what's coming. They really like to be able to count on something, partly because surprises are a little scary, and partly because then they get to sort of like be in charge of things, right? Once you teach them a routine, you can actually hand over control to them, let them run the show, and they really like that, right? It's also just better for us, right? If we have some things in the classroom, not the like big important things, but if we have some basic things on automatic pilot, it frees us up to be cognitively involved with the bigger, more important things, right? To be ready to ask those just right questions, to observe that aha moment that triggers for you an understanding of the child. But if you're still, come March, struggling with how do I get them from the front door to the, to their choice circle in the morning, or how do I get them from circle time back to the lunch table in the afternoon? It occupies you, right? And so routines are good for the kids, but they're also kind of good for us. And they're particularly useful in a time when you may feel a little more chaotic. And if you don't feel like the last 2 years have been chaotic, I'd love to chat with you and figure out, what your coping mechanisms are, because I think the rest of us are feeling a little bit like the last 2 years were a bit chaotic. And let's acknowledge, right? This is an important, pivoting point. Again, I shared in New Haven, we have, for the first time, unmasked, right? Not our schools. Our schools are still wearing masks, but in public spaces, we are not wearing masks. This is a shift, right? It's a positive one. We should feel good about the fact that infection rates are lower, that more people are well in our community than have been in the past 2 years. That said, every transition is perilous, right? Is nerve-wracking and dangerous. And oh my gosh, now we have to figure this out. Like maybe some of you are encountering that you are no longer masking in your sites. Yikes, like now we got to figure that out, right? Even positive transitions are transitions, and any transition can bring up stress, right? And so as even these good transitions begin to happen for us in this time, let's acknowledge that they're still stressful, right? To start this conversation off, it's important that we all come to some agreement on some basic child development principles, right? First, that all children develop through sequential and predictable stages of development, right? We know what those are. They have been well documented and defined by psychologists, from the 1900s to now. And all kids sort of follow them. Normative child development follows a set of a path, right? But children go through that path at their own unique individual rate, right? And sooner is not necessarily better. Faster does not mean better, right? Additionally, a child's developmental stage, where they are on that path, while we know there are typical things that happen at certain ages, it's not an exact match always with their chronological age. So, for example, we know most kids walk at 1. So we say, okay, kids tend to walk at 12 months, right? But the reality is your child may walk at 10 months, they may walk at 14 months, right? We say most kids read around 5.5, 6, but the reality is you may have some kids in your classroom who at 4 are already reading. You may have some kids in the classroom who by 6.5, 7 are just beginning to read for comprehension, right? And so there is a variability, right? We have basic benchmarks, but a little variability in each direction is quite normal. Now, the importance of those milestones or benchmarks are, of course, that if they are significantly delayed, then we pay attention, we offer support, right? But a little variability in one direction or another is just kids being normal kids, right? And why is there that variability? Well, there's a couple of reasons. They can be because of heredity. There can be internal factors that cause that variability. There can also be external factors. The environment can cause some variability. This is an essential point to acknowledge right here, right now, where we are, 2 years, almost to the day, into a pandemic, right? Almost 2 years to the day, our schools here in this district shut down. If we want to believe that the last 2 years has not had any impact whatsoever on our children's development, we are probably being naive. Now, is the impact all necessarily negative? I do not believe that will be what bears out, what we find to be true, in 10 years when we've studied this moment in child development history, right? I think some things were positively impacted. Some things were potentially negatively impacted. And then I think there are some things that are just impacted, right? That development shifted a little bit. And if we take away our own needs and goals for kids to do adult decided things on time, whatever that timeline is that we've agreed to, if we get rid of all of that adult defined stuff, yeah, kids might do things a little later, a little earlier, but it's not necessarily good or bad, right? Sorry, someone's knocking on my door. This external influence may be changing the trajectory of child development a little bit. Now, the likelihood of that, to be quite honest, is quite low. We've been following children, since the early 1900s. And despite things like the automobile and, television and all of that, even like amazing Nike sneakers, right? Kids still walk at about 1 year old, right? Kids still read at about 5.5, 6, no matter what curriculum we decide to bring to the table, right? So regardless of some external factors, kids are pretty much like, yeah, I'm good. I like the trajectory that we've sort of established over hundreds of years of evolution. And evolution may be shifting a little bit, but it's going to take a while for us to see that. However, it's important that we acknowledge that some things might be impacted, that the 4-year-olds you're receiving today might look a little different than the 4-year-olds you had last year, the year before, and certainly if you've been teaching for 10 years, the 4-year-olds you had a decade back. That's important for us to acknowledge, that we need to meet our children where they are, respond with developmentally appropriate practice as always, right? My proposition is that one of the ways in which we can support children who have some of whom who don't remember life pre-COVID, right? If you have 4-year-olds, they were 2 when this started. They have no memory of life pre-mask, right? So what we can do for them in a world that feels like it's constantly changing for good reason, because it is to give them something to count on, right? Is to give them some stability. Routines offer that. That's why at all times through development and through history, offering these routines in classrooms has been useful. But right now I feel like it's an essential tool that we need to pay a little extra attention to. When we do see that behaviors are erupting in the classroom, right? There's a lot of talk about this increase in challenging behaviors in classrooms that kids who have not been in school before are struggling to transition into classroom settings now. This is probably all, not just teachers imagining this. Some of this is probably happening. We don't know yet. We don't have a lot of data, but it may be. What I do want to offer you is, a first step approach to thinking about what those behaviors might be telling us, what might be happening, so that we can, when we build our routines, we can do them appropriately, right? What I ask teachers to do is check in on our expectations, right? Are the things we're offering in our classroom, and in particular around routines, right? Are they things that children generally at this developmental stage are really capable of? Now, some routines sound really great, but it's like herding kittens to try and get, a group of 2.5, 3-year-olds to do something like line up on their own, stand, one shoulder behind the other shoulder, follow the line of tape on the floor, be quiet and walk, 2 minutes down a hallway. You think like, how can kids not manage to do that? Well, at 2.5, 3, that's probably not actually a developmentally appropriate expectation. So as we build these, we want to think about checking our expectations. Well, what can a kid of the age of the kids I'm working with actually do this? And then second, is the expectation something that is within this child's ability, right? Not just generally for development, but the kids I have today, which again might be different. Well, my kids 3 years ago did this just fine. Well, your kids 3 years ago might have been in preschool already for 2 years before they got to you, or childcare of some sort, right? An institutionalized learning environment is different than being at home, where there's far more freedom, right? So are these kids capable of this expectation, right? And then thirdly, under these circumstances, right, in this environment, in the world we live in right now, with the masks, with the social distance, whatever the requirements are in your classroom, are our expectations appropriate for this new environment, right? Checking in on all of that is essential as we build our routines and as we try them out, right? And problem solve for why they are and are not working. And then finally, is it something that can be expected under stress, fear, or fatigue? Because again, if you're not feeling stress, fear, and fatigue, I definitely want to know, what your exercise and smoothie routine is, because I think most people I'm talking to are feeling stress, fear, and fatigue, right? So the children are probably feeling a little stress, fear, and fatigue as well. We should acknowledge that. Why does it matter? Why does stress, fear, and fatigue need to be considered when I'm setting up routines and setting my expectations for behavior around routines? Well, it requires us to think just briefly a little bit about brain development. And some of you have heard some of this already, I am sure. But the brain basically has 3 parts to it, right? We can break it into 3 parts: the bottom, the middle, and the top. The bottom, that red part, is the survival part of the brain. It's really brain stem. It's almost not even brain. It's like spine, right? Nerves. And its role is to react quickly to danger, right? The whole brain is a survival organ, is trying to keep us alive. That part in particular is the part that is ignited when you touch a hot pan and you pull your hand away, or you're driving down the road and a squirrel jumps out in front of your car. That back part of the brain says, whoa, danger, react, and react quickly, because there's not a lot of time to consider options, right? We need that part of the brain for survival. We need that part of the brain to make quick decisions when danger appears. The middle part of the brain is the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain. That's the part that recognizes that connection is evolutionarily necessary, right? Babies know that they need to be super cute and smell really good so that we love them and hold them and take care of them, because otherwise they're really stressful to have around, right? So there's a part of our brain that really says we need to be loved, we need to be connected, right? And we need to meet the needs of that part of the brain in order to then access the top part of the brain, right? Because that's the way the brain grows, bottom to top, and that's really the way it reacts. If it's an emergency, the bottom part of the brain is on, and it doesn't want to think about I am loved and I am connected. It's just like, am I safe? Am I going to survive this car crash with this squirrel, right? But if that's okay and we feel pretty safe, then we can go to, am I connected? Am I loved? How are my relationships doing? That's an essential part of survival as well, right? Then if those two pieces are calm, right? Those needs are met, then we can think about the top of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. We call that the executive part of the brain, responsible for executive function skills, right? Those are skills like collaboration, problem solving, creativity, the cool stuff that we get to do in our classrooms all the time, solving puzzles, playing games, reading books, that's all executive function stuff. But the reality is that it's really hard to turn that part of the brain on if the other parts aren't feeling good, right? And so what routines give us is a way to calm the bottom parts of the brain, right? To give you repetition and consistency, something to count on. You know what's happening. It's not surprising. It's not scary. Routines are manageable, right? And so by offering some moments in your day that are very ritualized, the brain can say, I know this part. This is not scary. I don't have to figure this part out. Almost like a little automatic pilot there, right? And then the prefrontal cortex can come in and say, now I can get creative problem solving, collaborative, all those sorts of things, right? So we want this back and middle part of the brain to be calm so that the prefrontal cortex can participate in our life. We want the same thing to be true for kids. How we get there? Relationships, routines, and they build resilience, right? Relationships acknowledge that middle part of the brain needs to be soothed in order for the prefrontal cortex to come online. Routines acknowledge that the back part of the brain needs to be calm in order for the prefrontal cortex to come online. When those two parts of the brain are soothed, then you are more capable, right, of responding to crises. You are, in fact, a more resilient brain. The brain is more able to bounce back, right, from stresses, surprises, right? That's the process by which we want to both build the brain as well as soothe it, heal it, right? We want to give it a resting spot, right? In our classroom, you can rest your back brain. In our classroom, you're safe, you're loved, right? And then and only then can we do some of the creative problem solving kind of work that the prefrontal cortex needs. We call this process building in the bounce, right? The ability to be resilient is like bouncing, right? Bouncing back from something stressful. What builds resilience? Research has very clearly told us supportive relationships calm that middle part of the brain. Building executive function skills, the ability to problem solve, to think about new solutions to old problems, to imagine a different outcome to something rather than a doomsday approach that's like, oh, here we go again, the stressful thing, I can't get out of it, right? Additionally, offering kids opportunities for mastery, self-efficacy, perceived control, ways in which they're in charge, actually builds resilience. This is again why routines matter. The more you repeat, right, the process of coming into the classroom, taking your boots off, putting your slippers on, taking your coat off, hanging it on the hook, by, month 2, even a 3-year-old feels very sure about themselves that they can come in and do that work. Now, do they do it every time? Of course not, but they know it, they can do it. And they even like to teach the grown-up, right? Once they know it. That's perceived control, that's self-efficacy. Additionally, we want to offer positive experiences, sources of faith, hope, and cultural traditions, ways in which kids can remind themselves of joy, right? Those build resilience as well. And that's what the research tells us. Additionally, really important too, adults who strengthen their own resilience through healthy behaviors are better models of these behaviors for the children in their lives. Research has shown us that if we do our work on building in our own bounds, we can better support children to do the same. Finally, on this, to really, send home the point that relationships matter, right? Related to this topic of routines and consistency and trust, right, comes the relationships in children's lives. As part of the process of managing and building routines in your classroom, relationships need to be considered, right? Relationships with the adults in the room, relationships with each other. Those two can be sources of stress. And the more we can create stability and consistency and trust in them, no matter what, I can't let you do those behaviors. No, I'm not going to let you throw that block across the room, but you're still a part of our community. We still love you, right? Reassuring that that they are safe and loved in an emotional and relational way is essential to kids not needing to try and find out, right? If they're not sure, they will start to do things to check in on that, right? And those are behaviors that typically are not easy in our classrooms, right? So we want kids and we want our classrooms to be built so that kids feel safe and loved and in control and like they count. That's the point of our routines. Additionally, our role in the creation of routines as part of a self-regulation process is important to acknowledge, right? We find that kids can easily become dysregulated. And nowadays, the reporting from the ground is they're becoming even more dysregulated more frequently and in a harder way to bounce from than ever before, right? And what we want is kids to find skills to self-regulate. Yes, that's a reasonable thing to hope for and work towards. The reality, however, is that it is a skill. You have to practice it, you have to teach it, you have to model it, you have to hold their hand through it. What we call that process is co-regulation, right? With a baby, we get it, we pick up the baby, we rock the baby, we soothe the baby. Suddenly they turn 4, and we think they should be able to do things like use your words or control your body, right? And the reality is that their self-regulation skills are not quite at the point that they can really do that sort of thing when they're really worked up. I mean, think about yourself, you drive into a really crowded parking lot, you're about to turn into the spot and someone zips in with their tiny little, 2-seater car and snags that spot from you, right? And at that moment, if the person sitting in the passenger seat says, now calm down, find your words, oh, I'll find some words, all right, right? It's really hard even for grownups to find their words in an appropriate manner in a moment when stress is heightened, right? So it's even harder for a 4-year-old, trust me. What we need to do is model that for them, hold their hand through it, and support them through the process of moving from dysregulation to self-regulation. A really good tool for that is having rituals for that to happen, right? Some options in the classroom that allow them to choose how they're going to use that excess energy that they just, had built from the stressful experience, right? They may need to throw a pillow against the wall or throw a ball or whatever, run around the courtyard screaming, right? And then they can come back in and, think about what they need or talk about it or whatever. Once the back brain has calmed down a little bit, right? That's co-regulation. And so that's an important process to understand too, as a mechanism behind why our routines are so important. It's not just that it makes our life easier, it's actually a way of training our brains and our kids' brains to move from dysregulation to self-regulation, right? Remember, there is no more effective neurological intervention than a safe relationship. Safe relationships really are the foundation from which all other, stabilizing factors in the child's environment can be built from, right? They really need to know that they're safe and loved in order for this process of co-regulation, of self-regulation, and executive function skills to really build upon, right? So we want to remember that as we build our routines. Hopefully I've shared enough to convince us, and you came tonight to understand why routines really matter, right? They are the fundamental tool in creating environments that are safe, that are relational, connected, and that are child-centered, that allow the child independence, choice, self-mastery. That's what we want at the heart of our routines. All right, so here we're going to shift into some more practical, like, well, how do we do this? How do we build routines in a way that are meaningful, that work, and that will support all the things we just talked about, just relationships and stability and all of that. First, and some of these will be like, well, duh, why did I, give up a night to hear this? But it's really important that we remind ourselves, that some of the basics are really like the whole party, right? So at the foundation, we have to be clear and consistent, right? This is not about having no limits and anything goes classroom. In fact, that's quite frankly neglectful. And while we use the term child-centered, that does not mean anarchy, right? It doesn't mean every kid gets to decide their own rules, set of rules, and when they want to follow them and when they don't, right? Child-centered simply means that we are holding the child as the primary reason for which we are creating the rules and routines that we are creating, right? That our understanding of their needs and their developmental needs in this moment guide us in creating the rules and routines that we do. So we want to be really clear and really consistent. And we're going to break this down even more because it's so very important. First, clear rules and consistent boundaries are key, right? Let's think about preschoolers in particular. What do we know about them? Well, first, they see rules as unchangeable. So one thing to recognize is they're usually pretty game for consistency, right? If you say there's a rule, they really believe it's a rule, right? And have a really hard time being flexible when the rule no longer applies, which kind of happens sometimes, right? So we have to be compassionate with that and developmentally understanding of that characteristic of the preschool child. They become really confused and really annoyed if they sense that a rule is not being consistently enforced or broken. Yet you have those kids in your classroom that are like the justice holders of the classroom, sometimes we call them the tattletales, but really what they are is they have this incredibly heightened sense of injustice, right? They cannot live with the possibility that someone has not followed a rule, right? And they get really worked up about this, right? All they are is a typical preschooler at that point. What also sometimes happens though is if that happens enough, they start to ignore the rule. Like their sense of injustice is so broken that they're like, clearly this cannot be a rule, right? I must not have to follow it because no one else is. They may also try to start to negotiate their way around a rule if they don't think it's working in their favor. What helps is explaining to them the why of the rule, right? Not just saying don't throw blocks, but saying, I can't let you throw blocks because someone could get hurt. I wouldn't let someone else throw a block that might hurt you. My job is to keep you safe, right? So now they're like, oh, well, that kind of sounds pretty good. Like, I don't really want a block in the head myself. So I kind of like that you're gonna not let people throw blocks at me, right? Understanding the why behind rules helps them follow them usually, but also begins to help them, and they're not good at it still, being flexible, but it begins to help them understand why sometimes the rule might not be followed. Here's an example. Mr. Parsons explains to his preschool class that for safety reasons, they must always hold hands and walk 2 by 2 whenever they go outside. How many of us have that rule, right? You got to hold hands, you got to have your partner, you got to walk holding hands 2 by 2 when you go outside. Suddenly the fire alarm goes off. He says, get in a single line and get out of the building. But of course, one child refuses to leave the room because, oh my gosh, where's my buddy? I'm not holding her hand. I can't possibly walk out of the room. Well, no, I need you to get in line and get out of, but you said we should always, what's the rule, right? Clear, consistent. They're not going to be good at shifting, particularly in a moment of stress, right? So that's a really good example of a really good reason why you might have 2 rules, but you might have to explain that in advance. And importantly, if they're not following the rule, don't right away assume they're being naughty. They just may be being 4, right? And being like, no, there's a different rule. I can't possibly be flexible, right? Another example, tables are to eat on. You may climb on the wooden steps, but if you climb on the furniture again, you may fall off and hurt yourself. This is a good example of an explanation of a rule, right? Not just don't climb on the table, right? But the table is for eating. I don't want your dirty shoes on the table. We just went out to the playground. Now your feet are full of mud. Now you're going to put them on the table. That's kind of icky for us to eat on. Give them the explanation for why the rules exist. Even if you think you've been clear, it is amazing how unclear the English language in general can be, right? Things like, get off my back. And the kid's like, what are you talking about? You know, or what's another good one that I've heard in classrooms a lot? Cut it out, right? Cut what out? I don't understand. They're very literal, particularly the older 4s. They start to understand language more in a way that actually makes it harder for you to be not literal or sarcastic. Like sarcasm is just lost on most preschoolers, right? They just do not get it. It's not funny. It feels mean to them. So lose it, right? And I'm a super sarcastic person, so it's really hard with kids. Like they just don't get it. It just doesn't. It doesn't land, right? So even when you think you're being clear, if you're getting behaviors that aren't following the routine you're trying to set or the expectations you have, check your language. It may be that they just do not get what you're saying, or they in their head have a different rule in mind that's conflicting with the rule you're giving them, and they're not sure which to follow. Clear and consistent. How can we be more clear? Pictures, right? Not all of us are auditory learners, right? And so whatever you give by voice, give by picture. This is particularly important when it comes to the schedule of the day. If you want to nip at the bud, like get ahead of the what's next, what's happening next, what are we doing next, where are we going next, when is this going to happen? You know, if they know that they get to go outside and play in the special part of the playground today because it's your class's turn, they're going to be asking you all day long, is it time to go to the special part of the playground yet, right? Address that early. A visual schedule like solves so many problems, right? You go through it at the beginning of the day. You continue to, switch it or flip it as you go through each piece. They learn how to read a visual schedule, which is literacy training, right? Left to right in order. The pictures are symbols, right? All of that stuff is literacy. And they no longer have to ask because they're like, oh, right, we're going to do snack. And then, then we'll go outside or whatever they're waiting for. If you do not have a visual schedule, this is like the one thing I would love for you to leave with is just try it for the rest of this year and then talk to me this summer about how it went, because I really see amazing shifts happen in classrooms when the visual schedule is implemented. And they're fun to make too. The kids can help, right? All right, additionally, as we build our routines, not only show them what the routine is, but ensure that what's in that routine is in balance, right? We want kids to have a variety of kinds of experiences. And in particular, what I encourage is to have a variety of kinds of learning experiences, right? So you want some experiences to be child initiated. The kid gets to decide what's going to happen, and child directed. And then they get to direct how that play happens, right? But then there are other times when the adult needs to initiate, right? That's like center time, when you decide what manipulatives or activities to put out at your various centers, or what center is open and what's closed, right? So the adult initiates, but then the child gets to direct it. Occasionally, we probably need to have some direct instruction, some moments during which you are actually deciding what the activity is and then guiding them through it, right? A little bit of that is probably necessary and helpful in teaching some basic skills, right? When you have an explicit learning goal, you want them to learn the letter B, right? That may require that you decide they're going to teach B. You're going to give them, blocks that have B's on them, wooden B's, items that start with the letter B, right? And then you're going to go through it and teach them, well, this is a B, and this is how you draw a B, and this starts with B, right? And then maybe after that, you allow them to go more towards guided play, where they get to decide what to do with those B items. But some direct instruction might be necessary. What we probably don't need a whole lot of is what we call co-opted play. That's where the child has this, I got this great idea of what to play, and the adult is like, actually, my idea is better, come do this thing, right? We probably don't need a lot of that. And what we want to be careful of is that bottom row is not overpowering the top row, that there isn't so much adult directed time that the children, that your classroom is no longer child-centered or child-directed, right? Yes, a little direct instruction is necessary, but let's make sure we have some balance here where the kids get to decide what they want to play and do, or at least they get to decide what to do in the spaces, right? In the drama center that is open today, they get to decide what to do in there, right? It's part of building a sense of control and power in your classroom. So as you think about building your routines, you have to make sure that there's a balance of child-directed, adult-directed, child-initiated kinds, adult-initiated types of play or learning, right? You also want movement and stillness in balance, right? So as you think about your routines and your day, if you have too much movement, you're probably asking for trouble. But if you expect too much stillness, you're also probably asking for trouble, right? Kids at different developmental stages and different groups of kids, right, we find need a little more stillness or a little more movement, right? And so that's another variable to consider as you build these routines in your classroom. It's really important that the routines become comfortable and familiar. If you're worried that they are going to get bored, do not be. How many times have you heard the song "We Don't Talk About Bruno" in the last week, right? I have yet to find a child who is sick of this song, or a 4-year-old anyway, who is sick of this song, right? They don't get bored. We still have 2-year-olds singing Baby Shark, right? Over and over and over again. It's very hard to bore a child with repetition, right? There are other ways that they get bored, right? If we ask them to sit around and stare at us for too long, but they actually like to know what's coming. They like to memorize. They like to know what to expect, and then they like to be in charge of that. So remember that at a basic level, what you're trying to create is a classroom that's comfortable and familiar, right? And then, as we said earlier, in a big picture way, we have to remember that as we build our routines, consider transitions, right? It's the best time to ensure that a routine exists, that kids are comfortable and familiar with it, that they are empowered by it, that they know it and they can perform it, right? You have to plan transitions in. You cannot expect that when the fire alarm goes off and you yell, get in a single line and march out the door, that it's suddenly going to happen for a bunch of 4-year-olds, right? It's not. You have to create a transition plan, keep it consistent, right? We can't be switching the plan regularly. Warnings, any sorts of warnings we can give are very beneficial to children's, emergency brains not being set off in a transition. You can build signals into your day, right? I know a lot of teachers who use chimes, for example, to signal that a transition is coming, right? Additionally, you can have something like a chime that then asks the child to do something with their body. What this does is force them to stop what they're doing. Like, how many of you have had difficulty getting, a 4-year-old to stop building in the block corner, put the blocks away, and come over to circle time, right? But if the chime rings, they have to stop, stand up, do something with their body, do 3 jumping jacks or whatever. They're already broken, right, from the activity. And it's not that it's going to be suddenly easy to get them to move from the block corner, but neurologically, it shifts their brain, right? They know there's a warning there, and then they've already sort of broken the trance of the block corner at that point. We want transitions to be efficient and timely, right? If they're not, they become really stressful for everyone, right? So a couple of ways to help if your transitions are tending to extend. You can play a song, right? Or use a sand timer that encourages them to understand the length of the transition. So, you all have your cleanup song probably, right? That's a perfect example that by the time the song is ending, we're expected that all the blocks are put away in the corner, right? And they get it and they know it. And does it mean they do it every single time? No, but does it help? Absolutely. And again, partly why it helps is it empowers them to be in charge of that transition. They understand it, they know it, as opposed to being shocked. Okay, put the blocks away, go to the lunch table, right? Then they feel very sort of manipulated and controlled, and then they're going to try to find ways to get control back. And we don't need.
There's a question. There's a question in the chat about transitions. Would it help to have the transition as part of the visual chart for children that have a harder time with it?
Yes, I love that. You can even have like, it can be like a section in the visual chart, right? They don't need to know it's a transition. It's an activity to them, right? A 30-second transition to them might feel as long as story time, right? So I love that idea. Thank you for sharing it. And putting it in the visual calendar, practicing it, modeling it, all fantastic. Thank you for throwing that out there. Which brings us to the next slide, model and practice, right? You have to explain your routine. After you explain the routine, you have to do the routine, right? You have to do it, show them what you mean. You have to let them try to do it, practice it, and a whole bunch of times so that they remember it, right? There are things that we think, again, are really clear, like when we say, walk in a single file down the hallway. No idea what that means, right? And then you say, oh, well, one person behind another, right? So then they're like right behind one another, stepping on each other's feet. No, 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 make more space, right? And you're like, how do I explain to these kids what I want? Well, you can't, right? You can't. But what you can do is show them, give them, physical ways of keeping the space you want. Now everybody's got the little markers down the hallway. So, you hop on each one as you go. Or maybe you do want them holding hands, but an arm length apart or something, whatever it is that works for you. But you can't just say it and expect it to happen. They're not being naughty when they don't follow that. They just don't know what you're talking about. So you do it, you practice it a bunch, and then it starts to stick because then they can control it. To finish the essential building blocks of creating a routine in your classroom, I want to share that there's got to be something you're doing to also put the fire out in your own brain. Some sort of routine or ritual that you have that allows you to come back into the classroom every day feeling okay about the hard work that you do. It is not easy, right, being in a classroom today. And we know that for a fact, right? And so do I think this is, the solution to teacher burnout? Heck no. I think there are systemic things that we as a society and policies that need to be put in place that need to come to the forefront. More resources need to be put towards them, and you all need to be supported a heck of a lot better than you are today. Meanwhile, you also need to take care of yourselves, because those other things are going to take time, right? And so figure out what it is that allows you to refill your cup, to feel replenished. What are those routines that allow you to come back into the classroom able to do the hard work that you do? All right, so I left a little time for questions. And there's my email. I always welcome you to reach out to me. There's our website if you're looking for some resources there. You're welcome to take a screenshot or whatever of that, because I am about to stop sharing my screen so that I can see more faces here and we can chat a little bit. So let's stop share and end my show. And there we are. So I will open the chat just in case there's anything else in there. Anyone else have any thoughts, questions, something that we didn't address, again, that you want to put out there that even if I can't address now, I'll be sure to try to follow up on?
Hi, Peg. It's Carrie. I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you handle children who might be more advanced in a classroom than others without feeling it's okay to ignore them and focus on those that are struggling in other areas?
Yeah. In general, the impossible task of a teacher is to individualize instruction, right? So I'm not suggesting it's easy, but in general, what we need to be thinking about doing is taking whatever activity you're doing and thinking about how to make it developmentally appropriate for a range of kids. So that's the textbook answer, right? In practice, I do not want to pretend that that's easy, particularly the way preschools are built, in that you could have a child who developmentally, in a forest classroom, let's say, you could have a child who developmentally is like, at this point, February, could still be like barely 4, developmental 4, maybe even 3.5. And you can have a child who developmentally, though they're 4 years old, is like a 5.5-year-old, right? That's a big gap between what a child's abilities are. Ideally, you're not creating whole different lessons or choosing whole different manipulatives for them, but you're thinking about how to take the activities that you're doing and expand them in both directions. And the other reality is that there are always children in our classrooms who are going to require a little more time and assistance, right? What we want to create is an equitable learning environment for all, but that can be achieved with some kids getting a little more time than others, so long as those other kids who are not potentially receiving all of your attention time are still receiving the resources, the challenges, the materials that they need to continue to grow in their development. None of that is easy, and we could spend another 2 hours talking about how to do that, but that's the sort of the practical approach to answering your question.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that.
Anything else? Any routines that you've tried that you're like, I've been trying this for 2 decades and can I just give up now?
Hey, I have a question. I run playgroup with Erin over there on my screen. And because our program's just an hour long and we have a very mixed age group, usually, babies all the way up to potentially 4-year-olds or so. Do you think that having like that visual calendar is good to start even at that real young age? I mean, because we've got a mixed group, do you think that the younger ones would even get it?
Not the same way.
Okay.
What was the youngest you said?
Well, like today, it was their first day back for playgroups, and I had some as young as 2 months. Obviously, they're not going to be paying attention, but I've got toddlers now, a lot of toddlers. So I don't know. I was just wondering if I incorporated it, but I've got preschoolers who come in as well. They're all together and we're all working together. So is it worth it to do it for just that hour long? And,
Yeah.
We are trying to have a sort of a routine, it's play, then clean up, then snack, then story and circle and that kind of thing.
So I am really supportive of mixed age classes. I think really good things happen there. And I think the research shows us that really good things happen there. So you've got like an amazing setup there. That said, they're also really hard to manage. Do you have adults?
Parents are there too, Peg. The parents are with them.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask. The parents are there too. So great. So, so let me answer and give you an example of a personal experience that's similar to what you're trying to do. I think that if you had a visual calendar schedule, right, for even your hour, a couple of things would happen. The young kids aren't going to get it, but that's okay. The adults will. That's helpful. The oldest kids will, and what they then do is lead the younger kids, which is really nice. So even if the younger kids can't follow the schedule or don't even understand what's happening up out there, they start to follow the other kids who are following the schedule. That's nice. In all cases, you're creating this ritual, this consistency. They know what to count on. That's really good for everyone's brain. Here's the sort of warnings I would give is that and it sometimes happens that you are going to change the order. You can't just do it, right? You have to make a big deal out of it. Oh, today, instead of doing play and then our story, we're going to do our story, then our play. Well, why? And you have to have a reason, right? So the benefit of that consistency is that it's consistent. And when it's not, it's okay. You just have to acknowledge that it's not going to be consistent. And in some ways, that's an opportunity to practice building that bounce. Are they going to be okay with that shift, right? I have in my career taught many mixed age parent-child yoga classes. And sometimes that's like the parents who bring in the 4-month-old and the parents who bring like the 8-year-old who's like running around the room, right? I love having sort of a visual representation of what we're going to do. I used to use cards and we put the cards out. Sometimes I'd let the kids choose what order, out of these 12, you can put them in any order you want. But then we follow it, right? I think it really did help sort of bookmark what was happening, know how far in we were, know when it's going to end, because some kids have a really hard time with things ending. And so by having sort of, for me, it was like the same 3 activities lead up to the end and never switching that. It sort of warned those kids, now we're winding down, now we're gonna, and that ending sort of led to the moving towards the door and the putting the shoes on, that's all part of the routine. It can't just like stop and magically these kids like walk out of your room with their shoes on, right? In yoga. So I have found that it works even for short, they weren't even an hour, these sessions. Sometimes they're like half an hour, and it's still really good to have a visual representation of what's happening. So give it a try and I'd love to hear back.
Thank you.
Yeah, hang in there.
Peg, do you have any resources to share? Earlier talked about faster is better. And when it comes to learning routines or just developmental milestones in general, that's something that I have families reach out about a lot. Do you have any resources to share when it comes to that idea of faster isn't better?
Yes. We have amazing little brochures that are called, I am 2, I am 3, I am 4, I am 5. And they give you sort of the like, here's what to expect at this developmental age, and some, room in each direction, right? So, so there's that, which allows parents to be like, oh, because my 4-year-old can't hit a baseball with a bat yet, doesn't mean they have no hopes of the major leagues, right? They're just not supposed to be able to do that yet. So there's that kind of stuff. We have a couple of booklets on our website on play and on parent-school connections that talk about this faster is not better concept. And then if you really want some like good, solid, old school stuff, if you look up anything by Arnold Gesell, from 1950 to 1960, that in 1970, 80, even anything from the Gesell Institute, there's lots out there on this idea of not rushing children. Yeah, but I really love our little pamphlets. They're really, and like I was I am a parent, not I was a parent, like mine's 13 now, so she's a little bit baked, but not really. And I really liked, she's 3, I just want to deal with 3, like I don't want a whole book that tells me what's going to happen when she's 5 or 6. Like I can't handle that right now. Just tell me why she's being so weird, right now. Oh, because she's 3, that's why. So I really like the little pamphlets.
What age do they go up to, Peg?
I think in English and Spanish, I think we go to 5.
Okay.
That's
Adrian,
perfect.
were you looking for more? Was that what you were looking for, Adrian, or more like K to 2-ish?
I think the biggest questions come from kindergarten families. So for me, yeah, for sure. That's really helpful.
Yeah,
the 4s and 5.
The 5 brochure goes 5 to 6, so 5 to 5.5 it covers. So that's a good one for what I really like it for kindergarten welcome meetings, whatever you call it, kindergarten transition. And I know you guys have a really solid kindergarten transition process in Enfield, but I don't know if you're using it. We have the 5-year-old brochure and a book called The Kindergarten Conversation that really talks very clearly about thinking about what expectations to have for your child as they go into kindergarten, how to have them be ready, so those 2 together as a kindergarten transition packet work really nicely.
Okay, thank you. And were you ever to make those for like 13 to 14-year-olds? I would check that out.
Gesell does have through 13. And so it is fun to look at, but it's really old and a little dated. So you have to like read through the weird stuff. But yeah, man, we could have a group on the 13-year-olds.
Yeah, I have a 14-year-old. I hear you.
Awesome. It's awesome, but it's hard. It's hard. Yeah, thank you for being here. All right, well, I'm aware of the time. We're 8 minutes over. So I will pause here and free anyone who needs to leave. If anyone still has a
you had mentioned
Uh-oh, I lost them.
I think you have a bad connect. At you, I think it's your connection. Maybe you're frozen now. Do you want to put it in the chat if that works? I don't know if she can hear me.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe she'll come back. Sometimes get off and come back on. But anyone who needs to leave, please do not feel like you know.
Peg, just a quick one. You had mentioned these.
Oh no, right at the same spot, we lost her again.
I'll type something in the chat for her. Maybe she'll see it. Oh, she put it in the chat, Peg.
Oh, can you tell us where you can get those? Yes, let me get the link right here and I'll put it in the chat. How about that? There, shop, there. Yep, we got 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let me just see about Spanish. 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it goes up to 5 as well. So here's the link. Here's the, so that's the pamphlets. And here's the kindergarten stuff is right here. Here's the kindergarten stuff. Good, thanks for asking that.
We need to get some of those for the FRC, Peg, so thank you.
I really like those little booklets. That's the only booklet that I've actually been part of rewriting. The others are predate me, but the kindergarten one and the pamphlets I've been a part of, and I really like those. All right. Well, thank you guys as always. I think we have one more hangout together coming up, right?
Yes, we have in May, we have care for, I think we're ending off the school year with care for the caregiver,
Nice.
which some of the family providers may have attended, but this for center-based, yeah, we haven't done that one yet. So that'll be a nice way to end the year. And it's always, yeah, right, exactly. It's never a topic that can be heard enough.
No, and I'm thinking about it really differently these days, seeing how overwhelmed and burnt out teachers are. So yeah, do come back for that. Let's get together on that. All right, well, great. As always, thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you for taking time out. Thank the people who let you take the time out to be here with us tonight. And I will see you, gosh, that's a long way, May. Maybe before, we'll see. May.
We'll see you next week, Peg, for FRC workshop too. Yeah,
yes.
You'll see it. You'll be around in Enfield for sure.
Good.
All right, thank you, everyone. Bye.
And
Thank you.
don't forget to stop recording and then.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that.
Because I know when it's my job, it's hard to remember.